This is the home of the Common Joe and the Common Sally in the know, even more so than all those media talking heads. Woo! Here we go again. It's another episode of the Outlaw of College Football. As I'm prodding along here in the off season, it seems like the off season takes so long to get back to the college football season. In the college football season, bam, goes by like a blink of the eye. But today's topic is going to be, is Texas and Oklahoma actually ready for the SEC? I want to give a shout out to Eric Taco Marino real quick as a contributor to this show because he's the one that sent me the link because he's one of those common Joes and common Sallys in the know, that put us in the know. So, as Triple H would say, are you ready? Texas and Oklahoma. Are you? Let's talk about it. Here they come once again, riding on in. It's the Outlaw Posse now in effect. And today's four horsemen shout-outs go to Denizen, Squidwater, Rich Castle, and Sydney Long are mounted up and saddled up and ready to go. And they're going to help us with today's college football invasion. And if you want to get your badge and get deputized like them and get your four horsemen shout-out as well as possibly be the comment of the day, all you got to do is hit that little join button next to subscribe button. It's $2.99 a month. That's just 75 cents a week. That's just a half a bottle of water for the Outlaw. And, of course, there's the big four that are all free. And that is like, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel. And we'll get this party crunk. Also, I can be reached on Twitter, a.k.a. X, under at OCF Productions. Now, getting right to it here. Seems the national pundits were having a little conversation today or yesterday about whether Texas and Oklahoma is actually ready. Now, this is a question that's been asked ad nauseum ever since Texas and Oklahoma made it known that they were coming to the SEC. And I am sure that both the Texas Longhorns and Oklahoma Sooners have one thing in common, and that is they're tired of hearing, are they ready? As I'm sure they're ready. They've been ready. And that's why they decided to come early. And a lot of people try to point out, that, and I've said this myself a time or two, that ever since the expansion of the SEC started in 1992, no one outside the original members of the SEC have won the SEC title, starting with Arkansas and South Carolina, and then later Texas A&M and Missouri. But the one thing that is different about Texas and Oklahoma is both of these programs have been multiple-time national champions, not just conference champions, bukus of times, especially Oklahoma. They got like 50-something conference titles, but they've been national champions multiple times. Those other four teams have never experienced that kind of success, really. Now, I know a few of them have probably won one or two national championships, but I'm talking about multitudes of times, past 3 or 4 times. So I don't think it's going to be that big of a jump for both of them. They might actually win an SEC title. They might be one of the first ones to win an SEC title out of the original SEC members. I think the SEC started in 1933. But they had Bobby Burton on with Andy Staples, and he says it seems that the SEC for Texas is probably the most SEC ready, according to Bobby Burton. Of course, he's a Texas guy, so of course he's going to say that, but I tend to agree with him somewhat in the short term that Texas is probably ready for the SEC with Steve Sarkisian. And they was asking why that Texas might be readier than Oklahoma, and it's because of Steve Sarkisian, in my opinion. A lot of people have given up on Steve Sarkisian, called him a drunk, called him all sorts of things. But he went to the Saban car wash, and now he seems to be SEC primed already. He's already had to coach under Nick Saban, and Nick Saban's one of the hardest guys to work for in the hardest conference. So I think that little bit of training with Nick Saban in Alabama has helped Steve Sarkisian probably make this process for Texas a lot easier. Now, Devontae Sweat, the Outland Trophy winner, and Byron Murphy, both defensive tackles, are the main concern that was talked about in this segment. And that is because the defensive tackle spot and the defensive line is always considered a hallmark of the SEC teams. You got to be big in the lines on both sides, whether it be offensive line or defensive line. That's where the SEC sort of separates itself sometimes from the other teams in this nation. Those two guys being gone was the main concern of the guy that they had on the show talking about Texas. But he did go on to say that Texas may have 6 draft picks in the top 100 picks of the NFL. And they're like, well, how is it that now Texas is developing these players to be NFL players now? How are they finally taking these 5-star players and developing them? Because this guy even admitted that in the past, Texas had been considered the place for 5 stars to come and die and not go to the NFL. And it comes back to that guy once again, Steve Sarkisian, learned how to develop players from one of the greatest developers of players of all time, that being Nick Saban. And that's an important aspect of recruiting that gets overlooked sometimes because you're not really recruiting somebody, but it's a bit of a byproduct and a bit of a showing of sorts that you can show to these recruits that say, hey, look, we ain't just going to tell you that we can put you in the NFL. We can show you. Look at our NFL alumni. And that's what's helping Texas, and it's going to help Texas in the bigger picture of things. Is if they continue to put players in the NFL, they'll eventually continue to get the great players that they're able to develop and eventually probably win a national championship and an SEC title in college football. One of the other things that was pointed out about Texas was the fact that they were able to get Anari Niblack, the tight end from Alabama, was a huge get for them. They had a great tight end last year, but to be able to insert Niblack in there and replace their starting tight end from last year, that was huge. As that continues to be a strong point for Texas is their tight end position. He also mentioned the fact that, even though BJ Robinson graduated from Texas last year, their running back, Jonathan Brooks, was very underrated. And he's saying that Jonathan Brooks will probably be one of the first running backs taken off the board in the NFL. What's even more amazing about Jonathan Brooks and all this is he wasn't really the star at the beginning of the season. It was Cedric Baxter who started having to deal with numerous nagging injuries that didn't allow him to get as much playing time. And so Jonathan Brooks come in and took over and done a great job. So now with Cedric Baxter back, and if he can stay healthy, they're going to have a nice little 1-2 punch at running back. They say the offensive line really has no holes at Texas either. They've developed them as well. They come in with 7 offensive linemen. I think it was in a class or 2 back. They were all pretty much 4 and 5 stars. And the amazing thing about that is they were able to keep all 7 of them and keep them from going to the transfer portal. So there's 7 deep at the offensive line. But this guy also pointed out that while there's really no holes at Texas, it's really the sum of the parts of the team, not just not having holes. You got to have a team that has cohesion and can work together. And he said that's the only thing he worries about is to have the cohesion going forward, especially with the questions at defensive tackle on the defensive line. And the last few things this guy pointed out in his efforts to say that Texas is indeed ready for the SEC is Sark has sort of gotten lucky in the fact that he's been able to keep most of his coaching staff intact, which is unheard of in today's college football. As Nick Saban started to see toward the end of his tenure, he kept losing coaches left and right. But the coaching staff has been kept intact somewhat, which develops that cohesion exponentially better if you can keep most of your coaching staff intact and not have a lot of turnover. Also, we wanted to go ahead and throw a nugget in there as far as the spring game goes for Texas, and that Arch Manning will finally get to be showcased much more so than he's been in the past, as all these Texas fans have been clamoring and hoping for As you know, the starting quarterback, Quinn Ewers, will probably only get 3 or 4 series in the spring game. So we'll actually get to see how good Arch Manning can be and how he can be cohesive with the first unit. They also, propped him up and bragged on him about how he has had the willingness to wait, especially with him being such a celebrity and having a celebrity family. They were saying that he's really not the celebrity type guy, and that he seems like he gets along with all the guys and doesn't come across as an elitist. They think Texas will probably have to go heavy into the defensive tackle area as far as the portal goes, and that may be the topper that can put Texas over the top and maybe have them contending for an SEC title and possibly even a national championship again. Now, the guy also pointed out something that they're really excited about, and this goes with Oklahoma as well, and the fact that instead of having Iowa State and Kansas coming in as visiting teams with their fan bases, which they probably bring a few people, but the big difference in going into the SEC for both Texas and Oklahoma that they're going to see is that the visiting teams are going to bring waves of visiting fans, upwards of 15 to 20,000 probably, which is going to be a big difference and make for much more exciting game days and tailgates. Now, getting to Oklahoma here, but before I get to Oklahoma, let's go ahead and get the comment of the day. Comes from J.D. Wilmoth. J.D. Wilmoth says, I don't get my hopes up with Oklahoma. I learned my lesson not to do that when Bob Stoops was the coach. He went from big game Bob to choking Bob. Too bad Patty Gasso doesn't coach football. Now, it's probably going to piss a few Oklahoma fans off at JD, but I thought that was a pretty ballsy statement coming from an Oklahoma fan. Now, getting to the Oklahoma side of this, they seem to have a bit of a nice little guarded optimism about them. They brought on the guys from Schooner Soup to talk about this. The main thing that they started out with was Troy Everett's injury, the OU offensive lineman, the center, actually. They said that was a big blow to the offensive line. The offensive line is considered to probably be the big question mark at Oklahoma, the one boogaboo that could hurt them going into the SEC, especially with a brand new starting quarterback. Yes, I know he played against Arizona, but that was just one game and a bowl game where a lot of the people didn't show up. So you really can't really gauge how good Jackson Arnold is going to be from that bowl game. He made some great plays in that bowl game, but he also made some bad plays, they pointed out. So they lost 5 offensive linemen from last year, from what it says here in the notes here, old school style, like people like me to say. They're trying to bring in Branton Hickman, who's a center from SMU. If they can get that guy, they're saying that might do wonders for the offensive line. And if Brandon Hickman decides to take Oklahoma up on a scholarship offer, more than likely Oklahoma will definitely take him. They moved Jacob Sexton to guard from right tackle. That's always an adventure. You never know what you're going to get when you move a guy from one position he's used to another position, even if it is on the offensive line. It's basically in the same area. And they also point out Jackson Arnold has been able to – will Jackson Arnold be able to develop properly with the questions at offensive line? And that's a good question. I mean, especially with a young quarterback, you want to be able to give him a little bit of time. But offensive line, as we always know, can be a boogaboo for any team. It really screwed my team last year is the fact that our center couldn't even hike the ball half the time. Spencer Brown from Michigan State, they brought him up. Really hasn't worked out. They thought he was going to be a good plug-in player from Michigan State, but Spencer Brown hasn't worked out. They said Wee Woo was the primary standout on the offensive line that could maybe help get some glue going to make this offensive line gel in time to help Oklahoma before they have to go to Auburn, which they're saying that's probably going to be the real big, true test of Oklahoma's mettle in the SEC when they play down there at the barn in Lee County in Auburn. They also brought up something that was really interesting that I didn't know. The SEC has a rule, and I like this rule, by the way. that states you cannot transfer to another SEC school in the spring portal and play right away. Every conference should adopt that, and it would probably curb some of this transfer portal crap if every conference would get on board and do what the SEC is doing. And the reason they brought this up is there's an offensive lineman at Arkansas that really wanted to go to Oklahoma that probably now will not go to Oklahoma because he will have to set out a year if he decides to go to Oklahoma through the spring transfer portal. They went on to talk about how the defense basically had to dig itself out of a hole from the Linky Boy area, a.k.a. Tebow, TBOW, the bitch out west, that being Lincoln Riley, who never recruited defense. Hate to keep taking shots at him. Well, no, I don't actually like it. But they're the ones brought up, not me. And the positives also they were talking about was the fact that the wide receiver and the tight end room is the deepest it's been in quite some time. Austin Stogner, while he was a good tight end and was a great blocking tight end, he wasn't really a flashy kind of tight end that you could depend on to do both, that being blocking and receiving. But there was really hyped up about five-star Devin Mitchell is coming in, as well as transfer Jake Roberts from Baylor. But there was really high on Bauer Sharp, the other tight end that's also on the roster. They're saying this could probably be the most dynamic tight end class or tight end room and wide receiver room in quite some time for Oklahoma. They said that while Seth Littrell likes to do some up-tempo, he probably won't do as much up-tempo as Jeff Lebby. They were saying that more than likely he'll try to develop the running game a little more and maybe slow down things a little bit and be able to try to get a first down when it's 3rd and 1. Last year, a lot of Oklahoma fans were probably more comfortable in 3rd and 10 than they were 3rd and 1. And because of the fact that they just were not as good at running the ball late in the game that they should have been, which they could have salted away a few games had they been able to do that. They pointed out that in Stillwater against Okie Pokey State, they probably could have won that game had their running game been a little bit better and they'd been able to pick up a few first downs and take some time off the clock in order to win that game. So they expect Seth Littrell to still have some up-tempo, but at the same time to develop that running game a little bit more, which will make a lot of the old school Oklahoma fans out there really happy. And the synopsis of all this for me and probably for them as well, it seems like Oklahoma's defense is coming around. Obviously, with Brent Venables now at Oklahoma in his 3rd season, you're probably going to start seeing more of a hallmark version of what Brent Venables had at Clemson. And that is a very stingy defense and one that you can rely on when your offense is not quite where it needs to be. And that's what I think might bail Oklahoma out at the beginning of the year is the fact that their defense is so deep, especially at the linebacker position. It's a really deep defense. And if they can rely on their defense the first few games of the season and allow Jackson Arnold to get his feet wet in the SEC, this could probably end up being a much better season than what people really think. Instead of 8 wins or something that a lot of people were expecting, maybe even make double-digit wins in your first season in the SEC. 9 or 10 wins to me would be a big success story in their first year in the SEC, especially with a lot of the holes that they have on offense going into their first season. Now, before we get out of here, I'd like to ask you guys and gals, there's a little heart down here, a little heart thanks button, a little money dollar sign. And if you want to make a one-time donation to the program, just smash that heart. And as I said before, you can also join the Outlaw Posse. It's not $2.99 a month. That's 75 cents a week. That's just a half a bottle of water for the Outlaw. You get your badge, you get deputized, you get your random 4 horseman shout out, as well as possibly be the comment of the day. And the big 4. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel. They're all free. And they get the party crunk. And they hit that YouTube algorithm for me. KMCA to all the other teams. Class is now officially dismissed.